to say 2090 at 1.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you to all who came. I really appreciate it. It's a great
2082.
My name is Jack Noonan. I'm the editor-in-chief, the outgoing editor-in-chief. And I would like to thank everyone who played a part in today. Thank the panel for showing up, taking their time to join us today for this great event. Specifically, I want to introduce and thank Kimberly Russell, our incoming EIC. Kelly Cloran, she helped a lot with getting everything started as well, and Tom Sisko, and everyone else who did little things that made today a great event. So I want to thank everyone again, and hopefully we'll do a great panel with Professor Barry as our moderator, esteemed professor, and faculty sponsor. So I'll let him take it from here.
Great. Thank you all for being here. This is our 8th sports law symposium we've done. The 7th year we've had this for the sports law review. Jack has been editor-in-chief, done a fantastic job shepherding this group over the past year. And then Kimberly Russell will be our editor-in-chief next year. So it's very exciting to have the students do this each year and have great things to talk about. So today we have a fantastic, very hot topic to talk about, which is collegiate recruiting and this changing definition of amateurism. We had none other than Mark Emmert this week say, yes, the definition of amateurism, well, it evolves over time. So we're going to try and explore what that might look like. Before we jump into some questions, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have some questions from the panelists, and we're going to have some conversation, and then after about half an hour, 45 minutes, we'll open up to you all to ask whatever questions you have and steer the conversation wherever you want to see it go. But let me introduce our esteemed panelists who are here today. First, we have Scott Anderson, who is the founder of Anderson Associates, which is a Chicago-based law firm in the sports, entertainment law, and the arts. He served as an in-house counsel for Arena Football League, worked for the Oakland Raiders, been the executive legal assistant to the executive director of Illinois High School Athletic Association, and he's also providing commentary in the media all the time at outlets like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, ESPN, Huffington Post, so on and so forth. So let's give Mr. Anderson a round of applause. To his right, we have Daniel Worley, who's the managing partner of Sievert Worley, which is a boutique sports law firm in Nashville. Dan's practice includes working with professional sports teams, college universities, and he's also the co-chair of the ABA Sports Law Division currently. And he has a sports law website, www.thewhitebronco.com, which if you hadn't checked it out, is very entertaining. And occasional references to OJ here and there. So let's welcome Mr. Worley. Last but certainly not least, down the road from Mississippi State, we have Bracky Brett. He's the Executive Senior Associate Athletic Director for Compliance of Mississippi State, where he's been for the last 16 years. And he runs the compliance department there, making sure Mississippi State stays in line with all the NCAA rules, which if any of y'all know anything about compliance, I know a lot of you all have interned with our athletic department. It's a crazy job to try to keep, all these things under control. And so I'm looking forward to hearing his perspectives on all these as well. Let's give him a round of applause. So where I wanted to start out with all you guys first today is, what do you think about the current definition of student athlete? And do you see that evolving over time? Or do you see us holding on to the status quo that we've had? Is this something that you think is going to change in the next 5 to 10 years? We've had this conversation about paying players in the front page of the paper for the last 5 years, but nothing is really happening. So, I don't know, what thoughts you all have on that to start out?
Well, I can start. In short, there's no way that the current definition of student athlete can survive. It was a fallacy from its inception, and it's something that's got to change. I mean, the term student athlete was essentially coined because the term indentured servant just had a negative connotation to it. They coined the term so they could avoid paying more comp to a football player that died as a result of football-related injuries. And now that they have used this, and I'll keep calling it a fallacy because that's exactly what I think it is, they keep using this fallacy of the student athlete to avoid more comp, to avoid compensation for the players playing the game, playing in college athletics. They use it as justification for their court, briefings. It's got to change. I mean, the world has changed, and from its inception, it wasn't even appropriate then, and it's most certainly not appropriate now.
somewhat agree with that, maybe not quite as strongly, but I would probably characterize it more as outdated, which kind of goes to more of Aaron's comments. The NCAA has traditionally been sort of slow to move on these sorts of issues and dug in. If you really follow the legal history of that term, there's a case called Board of Regents where it was mentioned in sort of the dicta of the case, which, as you law students know, dicta isn't binding, but the NCAA continually now, in every single case since then, hammers that the court approved of this message, that this is the standard that we're going to be able to use moving forward. So, that being said, I think that there's room for evolution in the term and the meaning of it itself. I mean, look today, I mean, I'm sure you all watched some of the Winter Olympics over the last few weeks and saw how Olympic athletes are treated. So, dial back, you know, when did that change? 10 years ago? Something like that? They were treated very similarly about 10 years ago. Not the ability to get endorsements and things like that. And now they're able to go out and get endorsements, but they're still considered amateurs under the Olympic definition. And just think to yourself, did the fact that they had these endorsements and other deals going forward, did that change the experience for you as a viewer, or do you think it changed their experience as an athlete? And in my opinion, it doesn't, and so I think we should start moving a little bit closer to that in the college level.
Well, you know, I agree with the fact that it is evolving, because everything in intercollegiate athletics is always evolving. And still, though, as somebody who is involved with student athletes on a day-to-day basis, I think it is very sport-specific in a lot of these issues. And we have a lot of sports at Mississippi State and at every NCAA institution where, by the nature of the sport and the way it's run, I think it still is a little closer to what we would consider to be the student-athlete model. Now, there are sports that, the ones especially we read about this day and time, and obviously those are the ones we've got to address. But overall, I know day-to-day I deal with a lot of student-athletes who enjoy the student-athlete experience at our university. And I think that there are a lot of kids who we don't hear from all the time who really are embracing the educational part and enjoy their athletic experience. That being said, there is some sports that we have, and it's not all the student athletes involved in it that have evolved this equation that we're dealing with. It has to do with outside entities, coaches, and media. And those are things that have kind of driven this discussion a lot, I think, when we look at certain sports in the term athlete-student or student-athlete.
Right, I mean, it really is interesting when you contrast what's going on in most of the non-revenue sports, where it does look very much like this traditional model where you're really the student-athlete in education, and you see these students graduating at higher rates than the rest of the student body and having better GPAs and that kind of thing. And then you look at the revenue sports where, you know, you have March Madness and you're talking about $1 billion and athletes are getting nothing in the situation. And so I wanted to sort of pivot a little bit with, we have the O'Bannon case, which was decided, I guess, about a year and a half ago in the Ninth Circuit, where the Ninth Circuit says the NCAA rules are violating antitrust law, but an appropriate remedy is cost of attendance for the student athletes. And that opinion, and it's dictated, interesting, it's written by an LSU law grad, sort of preserving SEC status quo, if you will. But the thought is, with respect to cost of attendance, anything related to education is something that might be part of the compensation for the athletes. And I'm going to start Bracky and come back this way. Do you see a place for, or do you see a world in which some of this $1 billion of basketball money, or $1 billion of football money, is funneled to athletes in a way in which the purpose still fits the broader concept of we're a university, we're all about education, we're not paying people to play, but we're trying to find other ways for them to be part of, or other ways to advance their lives within the realm of what counts. I mean, cost of attendance is part of this. But I don't know what thoughts you all have about that.
3 years ago at the autonomy business session, the autonomy conferences changed the definition of a full grant aid for the first time in a very, very long time. For years, it was tuition and fees, room, board, and books. But the regular student at any university, their cost of attendance also included those personal transportation expenses. We brought that into the definition of a full grant aid. And I can tell you that it has made a tremendous difference on our campus in the lives of our student athletes. And simply from the fact that, I'll give you some numbers, for example, our personal transportation amount at Mississippi State is about $5,400 a year. So they get a check of $540 a month that is their money to spend however they want to, for those personal expenses, for those things. And that increase also has helped our equivalency sports, because that's more dollars in the pot for an equivalency sport to give to their student athletes. So I've seen a really good increase in dealing with our football and basketball players especially, in how this money has affected their lives and our dealings with them. Because I'll be honest with you, when they want money, they know they're going to come to the compliance. Because they know we have a special assistance fund that the NCAA provides us money for. They know we're there to help them out. They know if they have a death in the family and they need to get home, we're going to get them there. So I think that has enabled us in our office to much better take care of our student athletes. Now, is that the last measure? Probably not. But I think it's been a great start, and it has provided our student athletes with the kind of things that every student at Mississippi State gets.
Yeah, that's a fascinating answer. I hadn't really interested to hear your point of being there day to day, because I questioned when that decision came out, like how much of a practical impact that piece would have, and I think it is especially on a college campus, a good chunk of money. To the broader question, it's really the for lack of a better word, $1 million question out there. What is the model? What can fix this? But I think even folks who are working at the universities recognize that there's an issue. I don't know if you guys heard the quote from Coach K recently in the last couple of weeks, but he said that college basketball has been on its knees begging for change over the past 2 years. These people recognize that there's something going on that needs to be fixed. Now, how to get there is a whole other question. And every solution you throw out, there's 100 problems that it causes, right? There's always timeline issues. There's are these classified as an employee now issues, and talk about a law school exam question would be a really good one. I'll just rattle off some of the models that you've seen proposed. First is to allow athletes, like I mentioned before, to capitalize on their likeness. So to get endorsements, be able to sign autographs for money, things like that. Second is to actually take money that they're already earning from these revenue sports and put it into some sort of fund for the college. When they graduate, they get, for whatever reason, for health insurance or something else. Or the third, which many of you probably know, there's an active lawsuit out there, the Jenkins lawsuit. It's filed by Jeffrey Kessler, who's a notorious antitrust lawyer in New York, that's seeking to actually create a free market where universities could essentially pay free market prices for players coming in, and that would sort of blow the floodgates open. So those are just a few of them. I think there's some combinations and intricacies of each, but it really is an interesting question to propose.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback on what Dan just said and what was said previously, there's no one particular area that's going to fix this problem. Changing the definition of cost of attendance doesn't solve the problem. Saying, okay, you have the right to go out and monetize your likeness and your rights of publicity alone doesn't solve the problem. It's going to have to be kind of a combination of a lot of, whether there's small fixes in this area or big fixes somewhere else, that's going to need to be implemented. It's going to take a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, a lot of really smart people to kind of figure out how all those, that puzzle fits together. but it's just one aspect of, what's going, I believe, ultimately to be the solution to the problem, or at least an attempted solution to the problem.
Right, so I want to pick up on that with you, Scott, because there's this whole thought about amateurism, which is, God, it's illegal to pay the players. And like in no other industry in the world, right? Our law students are going to go out and work this summer and they're expecting to get money for what they're doing. And yet we think because of this amateurism model that what's being done by giving student athletes money amounts to almost criminal behavior. In fact, we'll get to it in a minute, but I think the FBI is saying maybe this is white-collar crime, essentially, to pay student athletes and you're defrauding the university. But this whole perception that paying student athletes money is quote-unquote criminal, to me, doesn't really square with the reality. I mean, we have a status quo we're trying to preserve, but if you don't shift that sort of presumption, I don't think you get very far beyond cost of attendance. And so I know you have opinions about this, you've written about this a little bit. Can you give us your thought? I mean, why is this whole idea of amateurism so deeply ingrained, and are we stuck there forever? Can we move? What are your thoughts?
Well, amateurism is a lovely concept until it doesn't work for you anymore. The United States Olympics teams, we're always like, oh, we've got amateurs, we're going against professionals throughout the world. And then we started losing basketball games. We're like, amateurism kind of sucks. So let's have the dream team. And now we've got professional athletes in the Olympics. So it's great to, pound the table and, extol the virtues of amateurism until it just doesn't work for you anymore. In the college context, and, even with the DOJ investigation and the FBI investigation right now, where the criminal conduct, a lot of it is coming from is the fact that there's been bribes paid to university employees, the coaches and the assistant coaches, what have you. But yeah, how do we get to where we are today? I mean, you look at where the concept of amateurism actually came to the Balmy Shores of the United States. I mean, essentially it's a British or a UK concept that started at the elite universities, and the reason that that amateurism was brought into play is you had elite universities that were kind of in their own little arms race. They wanted to win for the glory of the university, and they started paying players. Well, the paid players were usually lower class individuals, and the social elites didn't like their wealthy silver spoon child mingling with mingling with the plebeians and the patricians. I mean, they didn't like the mixing of the classes. So they came up with this concept of amateurism that, to save the sanctity, the purity of what we're doing, we're not going to pay our athletes, which essentially kept the pork in the law. Well, I mean, America did what we always do, is we steal British concepts because we're kind of, British light, that's where our country started. So, we brought the concept over here, and, but then even the concept over here got skewed when you saw, universities paying athletes and, they're students, but then they really weren't students, maybe called the North Carolina model. But, it's like they were getting paid, and then it's like, oh, we got to keep the integrity of the game. And, it kind of, after a while, even if something's wrong, if you keep hearing it, you almost, by default, start to believe it. It almost kind of becomes part of your DNA. It becomes part of your thought process. I mean, if I'm sitting here right now and we tell you all day long that I'm wearing a blue jacket, there's been research on this. Eventually, you'll be like, maybe the jacket is blue. I mean, I think that's kind of what the whole amateurism thing is. That you keep hearing how it's vital to the sanctity and the purity of sport America. It's like we have to have amateurism. Well, who's putting out this notion that we have to have amateurism for the sanctity and the purity of America? Now, sports governing bodies that don't want to pay athletes. And I think it's like you just keep hearing it, you just kind of automatically believe it. And I think what we're seeing now is we're all taking a step back, or a lot of us are taking a step back and saying, well, wait a minute. What you're telling me doesn't really make a lot of sense, because me personally, I don't care if the players of the football team at the University of Illinois are getting a couple extra bucks a month. I'm still going to go watch them get beat by Michigan State because I love my Atlanta. I don't care if the men's basketball team is getting a couple extra bucks a month. Because you know why? Because I love my alma mater and I'm going to watch them play. Especially in college, it's, whatever your undergrad institution is, you bleed their colors. I mean, I bleed orange and blue, you know, some people bleed blue, they bleed red, whatever your school colors were, I mean, it's part of who you are. So honestly, I don't care if they're getting paid. Matter of fact, I think it's a little bit appropriate that they do. You know, but again, that's for the rest of the panel here to talk about. But I think it's a fallacy that people are going to somehow not watch March Madness because the athletes are making a few bucks. It's just not going to happen.
Right. And yeah, that's part of the argument the court adopts in the Van case. What do you all think? I mean, do you think this idea of amateurism is so ingrained that it's never really going to shift, or do you think that there's possibility for change and reform?
I mean, like I said earlier, I think it's slow moving just in general, just like a lot of things law related. I mean, honestly, I'm not an economist, but the real issue here is looking at it from an economy basis. College sports especially, and you made a great point earlier that this really only impacts small percentages of college sports, right? And not only just football and men's basketball, but really only the elite programs and the SEC schools and a lot of the others. I went to a MAC school for college. Let me tell you, their football team was not revenue generating, okay? I mean, there was, you count the people in the stadium, so, actually, yeah. All that being said though, where it is happening, where you're seeing these $10 million a year coaches contracts and these amazing new facilities that are being built, all of that money is coming from somewhere. And the people that are the ones that actually produce the product aren't being paid. So whenever you artificially cap a free market like that, you're going to see all these things happen. Coaches contracts, these stadiums. You're going to see the results of the FBI investigation. Shoe companies coming in, agents, runners trying to get a piece of this money, and eventually this stuff's going to spill out. And so it's just a matter of how the NCAA or how college sports, whether that is a future without the NCAA, pivots and moves forward and adopts these new models moving forward.
I agree that amateurism is evolving. I've seen it evolve, and I've seen it evolve in some very unique ways you may not be aware of. The most challenging amateurism sport that we deal with is tennis. Because they all come in, none of them are American at Mississippi State, I'll be honest with you, because all the good Americans go to Stanford in Georgia. But they come from a different athletic culture in Europe, where from the very beginning, if they're good, they're put in a system where they go to tournaments, they accumulate prize money, and I've seen the NCAA change the amateurism model for tennis in the last 5 or 6 years tremendously, where now you had to provide proof of all your expenses and your prize money couldn't exceed your expenses, but now we're letting them bring a certain threshold of prize money in, and we're still considering them amateur tennis players by the NCAA, and that traditional definition of amateurism, it doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit there anymore. And we have to certify. Part of the NCAA eligibility center is an academic certification, but there's also an amateurism certification that every student athlete has to fill out a questionnaire, and it's just as challenging a lot of times as the academic component in trying to look at and go by and research. And you talk about recruiting and amateurism. You know, we have a great saying in football and basketball recruiting: there's always an uncle involved. It may be a mentor, a godfather. We just call them uncles for lack of a generic term. There's always a third party that our coaches and everybody's coaches, you have to identify who those people are, because they are the ones, and they're the ones at the central core of this discussion we've had and the issues we've got, especially in the sport of basketball right now.
Right, it was a great segue where I'm going next. Basketball seems to be the thing, right? Because all of the NCAA's revenue comes from one place. It comes from the Madness of March, this tournament that's coming up, $1 billion, which they take in for their expenses, and they send the rest out to the universities. And so if college basketball no longer is a revenue-producing sport, then NCAA ceases to exist, because how are you going to pay the people who work there? And so that's why the scandal, I think, in the last couple of weeks got so much traction with the FBI investigation of the Memphis agent and getting all this information about runners, and did, coaches know that runners were facilitating payments to athletes from boosters and all these kinds of things. But at the heart of this is this idea of the one and done rule that we have, where you have to come, you can't go straight to the NBA like you used to. LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, and straight from high school to the NBA. Now you have to come for a year and maybe play for Kentucky and try to win a national championship before you go to the NBA. And so the one and done rule, I think, has created the situation where it sort of magnifies the sense that all this money's coming in and these guys aren't getting paid. And Dan, you've written eloquently about the one and done rule and kind of proposed some different ways in which we should tweak the rule or change it. And so I kind of wanted to start with some of your ideas and sort of talk with you guys. To what extent is this maybe a place where the NCAA should be focusing their reform? The NBA that Adam Silver's been talking about, maybe we change this rule. There's been some chatter about this. I want to start with
Sure,
you.
yeah.
Thoughts on this?
The first most important thing to realize is it's an NBA rule. So the NCAA can help lobby with them, I guess, but it's really up to the NBA to decide if they want to change the rule. And as you guys know, with any rule they want to change in the NBA, that's a collectively bargained issue. So the players and the league have to agree. And so there's always friction with those issues. It was up during the last collective bargaining session, and they decided to put it off the table, essentially, and keep the one and done rule, but it was definitely discussed. And Adam Silver's been on the record numerous times. I think, I don't remember exactly when, but within the maybe All-Star weekend a few weeks ago, when he came out and said, like, we're looking at this, we want to change this. Because the rule as it stands really doesn't work well for any party involved. So, NCAA coaches have been on the record, at least a lot of them. I mean, Calipari, maybe someone else, but most of them I think would say that they hate it because they spend all this time recruiting, all this effort, and they get a guy there for 1 year. For the students, it's bad. They come in for 1 year. A lot of times they'll go to school for really a semester, and then they'll stay eligible for a little bit, and then drop out because they're preparing for the NBA draft. Hard to blame them for doing it, but it's just the reality. And then for the NBA, they still don't feel like it's a long enough time for the players to get coached up. And so at the end of the day, I do think it needs to be tweaked. I put together a proposal, which I'll share with you guys quickly. But it essentially is that you adopt the baseball rule. The baseball rule is you either go out of high school or you commit to going for 3 years. I think it could be 2 years as well, one or the other. And then the second part of it is that you force the NBA to give all players guaranteed contracts. So as it stands right now, if you're drafted in the first round of the NBA draft, you automatically have a guaranteed contract for 3 years plus an option. If you're drafted in the second round of the NBA draft, it's completely negotiable. So most of those players get non-guaranteed contracts, but it would be a requirement on the NBA teams, if you draft a player coming out of high school, that player would have to get, even if it's in the second round, a 3-year guaranteed contract, which would cause the teams to invest more in the players. The third piece is that regardless of whether the player is drafted or not, they get 30 days to negotiate with teams if they decide in that period, whether they're not drafted or they were drafted and they weren't satisfied with how it went, whether they were later than they thought or whatever, they would have the option to go back to college and still play. They're not, just because they enter the draft doesn't mean they should be ineligible. I think that rule is so ridiculous. And finally, similar, this is also what happens in baseball. During the period between when their high school is over and when the draft happens, the baseball prospective draftees are allowed to consult with agents. And I would encourage my proposal at least would include that the NBA players would be able to do the same. So they could get some real advice and how to regulate agents and make sure they're getting the right advice is a whole different discussion. But there's a lot of really good agents out there that would be honest with them about their prospects and be able to educate them. So that's a moving target. I think there's a lot of other things similar to the one and done rule. Like, for example, I don't know if anyone saw it in the news yesterday, but the Australian Basketball League came out and said that they're going to pitch this new program to high school players to come play in the Australian League, and they'll set them up with a pretty good salary, better than the developmental league here in the States. Housing, all the costs for flying back and forth and those things, and give them a pretty good league to play in. So other leagues are taking notice of this, right? This loophole. So currently players can go play in the developmental league for the year, which we've seen, or play in Europe or China or other leagues and really get paid during that time instead of going and playing the NCAA. Although that's been still a small minority of players that are going that option. So, but yeah, it's an interesting rule. It's kind of related to this amateurism talk, and I think it's something that we will see change within 2 years, I would guess. It's just a matter of having the NBA players who are supposed to be representing the interests of high school kids. They're thinking of themselves, but really in reality it's tough for them to put themselves in their shoes when they're also negotiating all these other issues. And then the league, who has their own set of issues. So these two parties are really dictating what happens to high school players, what happens to the NCAA, and everyone else involved.
All right, I think your point about the NCAA changing the rule where you go in the draft and one thing they could do, but definitely it's a lot in the NBA hands. We wonder if the players are anxious to get more high school hotshots to come take their job away from them or not.
That's also true.
Y'all have other thoughts about this one and done rule they're doing?
I actually really like the end solution.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, no, I'm the pretty one, he's the smart one.
Both have great hair, though. So.
No, I think it's actually a really good solution. I don't know how workable it is or if it'll ever happen, but I think it does address a lot of problems because, let's be honest, there are some ball players, we're talking about sport basketball right now. There are some, basketball players that they're just not students. They don't belong being forced to go to college for a year. If you want to apply another trade, if you want to be a musician, you're not forced to go to college for a year to be a musician. You can go out and apply your trade. I think there's got to be a workable solution where kids that they just don't belong in a college classroom. And let's be honest, if they're a one and done, they're not in a college classroom anyway. They might not ever see this inside of a classroom because by the time the eligibility would catch up to them, they're in the NBA draft. So I think there is a workable solution, along the lines of what Dan proposed, and I think might be in the best interest of all parties. And it is. It's horrible to be a head basketball coach and have to year after year after year go and put the time and the energy and the resources to getting a kid that you know is going to be on campus for 6 months, and then you got to redo it all over again. If I was a coach, I would absolutely hate that.
Oh, I agree with both of you. The baseball model and the changes we've made to the baseball model has been a very positive move for us in dealing with our baseball signees coming out of high school. Because our baseball coaches right now, you sign a kid in November, and you know that 3 or 4 of them are probably going to get drafted high. If you got a good baseball program, you better be signing those type kids. And then the baseball coach spends the entire summer recruiting the kid over again, trying to convince him, hey, come on to college, we'll develop you in 3 years, you'll get more money than they're offering you now. Now there's some that come drafted out of high school, it's no brainers. If you're first, second round, we're going to wish you well. But those that are kind of on the fence are the ones that are really difficult sometimes for our coaches to deal with. Letting them talk to financial advisors and deal with people has been an extremely positive move in baseball. And I think that's something that would really help us in basketball. The other type kid that hasn't been mentioned that we have a problem dealing with and coaches have a problem dealing with is the basketball kid that comes out of high school to your university and he thinks he's a one and done. And he's not. And those kids, they become so disgruntled, they transfer. And that's where our transfer rate problem is in men's basketball as well. They're not doing well here. The dad, the AAU coach, you're not getting developed here. You need to leave. You need to go somewhere where you'll be developed. It's a evolving process and I love the idea of those kids going to Australia or anywhere else. I will say this about the one and done. If you were able to get rid of it, I would close my office and we would spend the rest of the day at the bar. And I don't mean a legal bar. Might be late, might be early.
So you're doing a great job. We don't have a script, he's just teeing up the next issue, which is the transfer rule in the NCAA. So we had this issue last spring with a basketball player in Pittsburgh. So you have these players who will be redshirted and they can finish their education in 4 years and they have a year of eligibility. And so it's been a new thing the last 5 years for these athletes to then transfer somewhere else to get more playing time, to improve their prospects, those kinds of things. And so the basketball player from Pitt, guess where he wants to transfer? UNC, right? Maybe you heard about the Lions case, I don't know. But anyway, he wants to transfer to UNC, and the Pitt athletic director says, I'm not releasing you. You're not going to get to go to North Carolina. And Jay Billis, being the defender, well, no, not really, but Jay Billis, raises a lot of issues with this on ESPN. There's a lot of public pressure, and so eventually the Pittsburgh AD caves on this issue, and the student transfers to North Carolina. But it begs the question under the current transfer rule, where the AD really holds the cards in terms of letting you transfer, or you have to sit out for a year. What is this? What does this future look like? We have this happening in college football too, with players transferring to different schools for their 4th year and being able to do this without having to sit out for a year in lots of situations when they're graduates of their undergraduate university. And so there's a committee right now that NCAA has put together. Our athletic director Ross Bjork is on the committee sort of exploring to what extent do we tweak the transfer rule to make it more permissive and to make people sit out less in certain situations. And they're trying to balance academics with athletics in this situation, but it's a really weird scenario because it seems like what's driving all the decision making is athletics. But we're talking about it in terms of academics. And so, it kind of leads into this deeper idea of amateurism. I don't know if any of y'all have any thoughts about the transfer rule and where that ought to go.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Scott.
The transfer rule is unique because, you'll have situations in it, it's a poorly kept secret that you'll get kids that will sign with the university and they'll just get run off the program. The coach is like, yeah, you're not the player I thought you were when I recruited you. Maybe it's time to go play at, insert directional school here. It's okay for a coach to run a kid off, and of course he's going to get a release from the AD then. But, maybe the fit's just not good for the player. But now he's stuck. Or the player, and, for the most part, I think, players don't sign with the university, they sign with the coach. It's like, God, I really love this coach, and, he could be coaching anywhere, they're going to sign with the coach. Well, now that coach leaves, and this kid's a redshirt freshman. And I've got 4 years with somebody that I didn't agree to play for. He didn't recruit me, I don't know him. And now the coach comes in, he's got a different system, he's got a different methodology. Maybe he's just a jerk. And the kid's like, this is no longer a good fit for me, but now he's handcuffed, or she, could be a women's basketball player as well. Now they're handcuffed and they can't leave the university unless the AD gives permission. And, to be honest, there's been some ADs that have been kind of stiff about giving those permissions. And I just think there's an element of fairness and appropriateness that needs to be worked into the system.
Kind of torn on the transfer issue. I agree, in those situations where a new coach comes in, you come from a system with a running quarterback, for example, a new coach comes in and it's a pro-style drop-back quarterback, and so the quarterbacks on the roster are basically useless. Yeah, it's too bad. So I think there are certain exemptions and exceptions, and because I went to a MAC school, I've always been a Michigan football fan, so we're trying to steal your quarterback right now and get him eligible. So that's sort of another example of potential waiver issues on this 1-year rule. So did I just make people mad, by the way?
Somebody's a Michigan fan, they'll tell you.
There you go. But I think on the other hand, for academic issues that you cited as well as just not having college sports look like free agency, where if a freshman goes to a school and isn't happy because they didn't play, maybe they think they're the one and done players, and really especially it takes programs time to build and you have to experience, but it's tough for an 18-year-old to really understand those nuances. For them to be able to just pack up and go and be eligible somewhere else as a sophomore would make college sports landscape look a lot different. I think you'd see coaches potentially recruiting on other college teams and things of that nature. So to really blow the doors open, which I think is actually being discussed, would be a big change in college sports.
The transfer working group that the NCAA set up was given a monumental task, but the presidents and chancellors have made it clear to this group that they expect change and they expect it this summer. And just by coincidence, we had a 1-hour webinar yesterday with the NCAA office, and they talked about an update with the transfer working group. And there's some things that everybody agree on, and there's some things that still have to be worked out. The concept of moving away from a school controlling where you go, that's going away. That everybody agrees that needs to go away. So if a kid comes in and wants to transfer, they will give you a notice of their intent to transfer. And the NCAA will develop a national transfer database where people like me will go in, if a kid wants to transfer, put their name out there, every institution will know that this kid intends to transfer. Now there's a trade-off there. The trade-off is going to be, if you tell me you're going to transfer, then I'm going to tell you that's great, but you no longer have athletic aid at our university after this semester. Because I've got to have that aid in order for our coaches to replace that player. Everybody agrees with those basic concepts. Now, where you get into the discussion still is, do they transfer and play immediately, or do they have to sit out a year? There's been some people in the media talking very loudly that everybody ought to be able to play immediately. That transfer working group, which Ross Bjork, as you mentioned, is our SEC rep there. And it's a challenging job, and Ross, we've had some great discussions, but that was never on the table with the group. The basic concept will be the same rule we have now, where everybody who transfers will do a year in residence. However, the exceptions will change. And that's where this academic component comes in. And they brought in the Committee on Academics to look at GPAs and just real data on transfers and how they graduate. Right now, this is typical researchers. They're telling the committee that, well, we think this GPA should be somewhere between a 3.0 and a 3.5. Well, I deal with student athletes all the time, and there's a big difference in a 3.0 and a 3.5. I think they'll land in the middle somewhere, quite honestly, when it's all said and done. But there are some people who are pushing back on the academic component as well. So that's one of the things that will have to be worked out as we go along. Obviously, we've got some other exceptions. If the kid's a walk-on and he's not on scholarship and he transfers, let the kid play. I mean, if he's a walk-on for us and he wants to go somewhere where he can play, and that happens all the time, let him play. Those are some no-brainer things, a lot of low-hanging fruit we have everybody agrees on. It's that what happens with the football, basketball player when they transfer, do they have to sit out a year or not?
Sure.
And we have 2 grad transfer pitchers on our baseball team right now. So it's not just football and basketball. The first grad transfer I ever had was women's cross country. And that was back in the old rule we had. To be a grad transfer, you had to go to a school that had a graduate program your school didn't offer. And that was a nightmare.
We had Jeremiah Solely come from Oregon.
And that's why the rule changed.
And instead of 4:30 on this.
Yes.
At this point, I think I want to do is open it up to the group. I've been patiently listening to all my questions. So I've got plenty more if you don't have any, but I'm going to open up the room and see what kind of things y'all want to hear from our panelists. We've got a lot of different perspectives up here, which I think is great. So any questions in the audience?
So y'all talk a lot about the NCAA and how it's kind of this potentially antitrust organization. If the NCAA does, dissolve, what about, these conferences, the SEC, the ACC, the Pac-12? Do you believe that they would step in and kind of take over that role? Because they also have a say And, transfers, I believe it's the SEC, you can't transfer within the conference within certain sports. Is that a fear among, the people that are looking at this stuff with the NCAA or not?
My personal opinion is I don't think there's like a huge fear that the NCAA is going to dissolve anytime soon. I think a potentially more realistic option, this is still not near term, is sort of the revenue generating big conference schools potentially breaking off at some point and having their own sort of set of rules, which actually kind of makes a lot of sense, because then you could start to apply the rules to the revenue generating sports at the big schools, which are really the ones we're putting out as the potential issue. But I mean, if NCAA goes away, it's anyone's guess what could happen next, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I don't think you're ever going to see the NCAA dissolve, but to Dan's point, I think, and I've talked about this for a number of years, especially when you saw that kind of that radical conference realignment going on, where everybody was going to this conference, you had to have a tally sheet every day to figure out what conference the school was in. I thought there was a very realistic possibility you might see the Power 5 break off and create their own thing, create their own version of the NCAA, and the NCAA would essentially become a conference of mid-majors. And the Power 5, whatever you call the conference, would then set their rules regarding compensation and whether they want to compensate athletes or essentially leave it up to the schools to say, okay, here's the parameters what you can do. If you don't want to pay them, you don't have to. Good luck, but you don't have to. And then see what happens there. I don't know. I mean the kind of the conspiracy theorist in me really likes to think that might happen because it might actually be the most appropriate solution, because now you're going to have a bunch of like universities in identical situations actually implementing rules that make sense for them, but don't make sense for the small, the mid-sized school, the one that's barely out of a 2A. It might make the most sense.
I believe that when you look at the conference office level, that as we evolve through there, I know in the Southeastern Conference, our conference office and our presidents and chancellors are committed to keeping our conference together. And we have a lot of rules you mentioned that apply to Southeastern Conference schools that don't apply or may not be in other conferences. If you transfer within our conference, everybody sits out of you. If you transfer, that's one of the rules. And I don't see any movement in our league for that to change at all. If it does, then Alabama just gets more. And we know it just means more. So,
That's always a safe tack in this audience.
it's a,
Just
go ahead. Well, I saw an Auburn shirt back there too. Warrior. But I think the conference offices in this could be the ones that are the driving forces. I know in the Power 5, those 5 conferences meet very, very regularly to talk about this. And what is in the best interest of the Power 5 will be paramount in the discussion. I can assure you that, because it's not called the Power 5 for no reason at all.
Yeah, I think to your point, I think it's exactly right. I think the conferences do have a huge role to play, and certainly the identity and even the fan identity, SEC and ACC and these kinds of things. And one model of approach that I've argued for is to funnel money to the athletes and the revenue sports through the conferences. The universities wouldn't pay them at all, but the conferences could have one share. Normally SEC is 14 shares. You could have a 15 share and have that money go to the revenue sports, and you end up with athletes getting $5,000 to $10,000 in the revenue sports. You wouldn't have Title IX problems because the Title IX doesn't apply to the conferences. But you could kind of get around some of this and take some of the pressure off of it without getting rid of the status quo in a major way. But I do think, and Jeffrey Kessler, I think, sort of thinks the same thing, that the conferences ultimately are going to have a bigger role to play in the next 5, 10, 15 years of shaping this landscape and how it's really going to shake out.
And what's interesting is all the litigation that we've seen over the last 5 or 10 or 20 years, whatever it is, might actually kind of create the parameters and the roadmap if the Power 5 did want to break off and create the Power 5 Association. Because they're going to have all these cases kind of saying, okay, these are the outside boundaries. And so as you create this new model, they've kind of got some direction, at least with the judicial system, of what they have to work with.
All right, other questions?
You hear people talking about all the money that the universities make off of football and basketball, and how the players should get some of that money. Does anybody think that you can just pay basketball and football players and not pay other athletes?
Yes, so I think,
Do you
like,
think that would pass muster with Title IX, for example?
that's a whole other discussion, but I think the lawsuit that we talked about earlier, the Jenkins case, which would kind of blow up and create a free market system, would not require any university to pay any single athlete or any single sport, would give them the opportunity to do so, and the market would dictate how that would happen. So if there's enough money coming in that they have the money to pay the players, then they can do so. If there's one really great swimmer in the country, he's an Olympian swimmer, they really want to have a program, they can pay the one swimmer, but maybe not the rest of the team. So, I mean, that theory is definitely floated. There are Title IX concerns in that, among other things. But at the end of the day, I mean, that is sort of the nuclear option, for lack of a better word.
Well, and I think you have to realize that, everybody thinks that if you roll a football team out in the SEC or the Big Ten, that you just got a money tree that you pluck. A vast majority of your athletic programs in this country, even in the Power 5 conferences, are at a negative number. Not everybody's, Alabama, Auburn, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. There's definitely college teams that literally have more revenues than NHL teams. But a vast majority of your programs actually don't operate in a positive cash flow situation. So the argument said, football is the piggy bank that pays for all the other sports. No, football is a very expensive sport. And actually for most universities, it's a money loser. So, when you talk about, what revenues there are to give out, you gotta realize that it's maybe 20% of the colleges or less that are actually making positive cash flow.
I would argue, though, that a lot of the expense that has gone into, like, profitable football programs is a result of not paying the players. So the coaches are making $8, $9, $10 million a year. Should they really be making that much? Should they be making $1.5 million and we pay the players out of that other $8?
The coaches
So
say yes,
it's-
they should.
Right. It's just sort of different accounting of where you're putting money, and I think the theory, and that's not necessarily what I believe in, the theory is that if you did that the free market of all of this would shake out and really pay where it would make the most sense to make a competitive football team.
Well,
Or basketball.
I was a high school coach for 24 years before, for some reason, I went into this 16 years ago. And I did not make $1.5 billion as a high school coach. But from the coach perspective, obviously, we've created a market of coaches where the salaries have escalated way, way higher than any other expense we have. Are they worth it? Some universities argue that what they pay their coach is worth it in what they get, what they consider to be the return back out of it. Could we get by with paying them less? Yes, we could. And I think the only place that can come from is from our presidents and chancellors leading the way and getting this spending under control. We are fortunate at Mississippi State that we have enough revenue to cover our expenses. We are a program that operates in the black, and we have for over 20 years. But there's a lot of strategies that go into that as well. And I think that there's a lot of schools that just don't have the revenue stream. I read this morning, not picking on anybody else, but, Southern Miss wants to renovate the Coliseum. They don't have the money. They've gone to the city of Hattiesburg and asked them for it. And that's not uncommon at that level at all as we look at these revenues. And do coaches get paid too much? As a former coach, absolutely so. They are not worth what we pay. We just changed head football coaches, and we are paying our new head coach $2 million a year less than the old one. And if you ask me right now, we got a better coach than the one we had. For a lot of reasons. And by the way, if you want to play basketball players at Mississippi State, My folks will play the women's basketball players a lot more than they will the men right now.
Well, one thing you're gonna have to worry about, when you talk about coach salaries, and again, I'll just play devil's advocate and say, hey, if you've got a program that's generating $100 million a year, and it's because your coach has got your team winning, going 12-1, 13-0 every year, he's worth every darn penny. But the problem you're gonna have with letting market forces dictate the level of compensation for coaches is the same reason you have salary caps in professional sports leagues. You're basically saving the participants from themselves. I mean, the salary cap in baseball is to protect baseball from its owners, because there's something called the rule of one. Everybody can be like, well, we think this coach is worth $1 million a year. And there's always going to be the frickin' Yankees. The New York Yankees going to come in, George Steinbrenner is going to stroke a check to a guy for $2 million. Well, that's the baseline for the following year. You've got the one team out of 30 that's going to be the renegade that's going to reset what the baseline is for the next years of negotiations. And I don't know how you would control that in this situation without getting yourself a little bit of antitrust trouble. Because again, you don't have, I don't know if you can put a salary cap on college athletics. I mean, I haven't really thought about that.
You can't with the coaches, right? The
Yeah.
law says, like I said, you can't do that.
You're trying to go with assistant coaches that didn't go so well.
Right, I mean, to me, the biggest problem with coach contracts are the buyout piece of it, that you're gonna fire the coach, and you're gonna have to pay them, Les Miles got fired in sports law, we're trying to figure out how many classes of the sports law class I had to teach to make the amount of money he makes for doing nothing. We're thinking like, 200 or 300 years worth of sports law.
Charlie White's made a whole career out of it.
Right. So to me, there's a big issue, but, again, it's coming down to the presidents and the GMs, and it's also coming down to the market pressure of you're paying this person this much, right?
Well, when you think about how the model is set up right now, what's the most important piece of the puzzle? It's the coach. Because the coach can recruit all the players in because they're all on a fair playing ground. But if we were paying the players, what would be the most important piece of the puzzle? How much you pay the players, probably, right? If the coach is devalued, it goes down. So it kind of depends how the model's set up. But the coaches certainly have a hugely leveraged role. Sean Miller's contract, Arizona just got leaked, and I don't know if anyone picked up on this. It was kind of making news rounds, but for him to be fired for cause, he was going to get a payout more than he would without cause. So that is just completely ludicrous. I mean, I've never seen a contract like that before.
That's good draftsmanship right there.
Putting yourself in the shoes of his lawyers, they had so much leverage that they could say, hey, if you fire us for cause, we're getting 85% or whatever the percentage was of this, $30 million deal extension. That's wild, but that's what happened. So it really shows you how important and how much leverage these coaches have in some of these deals.
Which begs the question, why don't you just fire him without cause then? Yeah, without cause means you can fire him for any reason you want. I don't like your tie, you're fired. Save yourself $1 million.
Questions?
I have a question for Mr. Brett. So if an issue arises with athlete's eligibility, whether it be due to an impermissible benefit or whatnot, what inquiry does your office undertake to decide whether he can ultimately participate or not, or she?
Great question. If you didn't hear, he asked how we handle an investigation with a currently enrolled student athlete.
Or graduated, or?
Well, let's just kid is on. Well, it's different when you got the other issue is the prospects before they get to our campus, which is a bigger challenge than the ones that are already on the campus. But impermissible benefit violations, we process 8 or 10 of these a year, because an impermissible benefit violation could be a student athlete got a meal on an official visit when they weren't the host and they have to donate $18 to charity. Now, that's probably not what you're referring to. That's a pretty easy investigation because there's a paper trail. What you get is these other sources of information that say this, and we deal with this all the time, this player is driving this vehicle, for example. So I have a permanent subscription to a bunch of services, like especially researching vehicles, and we have obviously local police and a bunch of other resources we deal with. We find out what we can about the vehicle, then we just simply go and interview the student athlete, interview the parents, ask for the documentation, just kind of go from there. It's a pretty thorough process, and it sometimes takes a little longer than people like it to, but you certainly don't want to make a mistake in it. Vehicles are easier to track than a lot of other things that, you know, Joe got $1,000, you know, from Dan to sign with Mississippi State. That's a whole other issue that's much harder to prove, because people in those situations are known to lie a lot. So it's very difficult to prove, very, very difficult to prove. And then you get into, that's when you get into major infractions beyond. That's a whole different type of investigation.
It's hard to check a white envelope.
It is. Always deal in cash is what an old coach told me.
So, along that point, do you notify the NCAA of every investigation you're doing, or do you do your independent and then notify them as needed?
Depends on the level of the violation. My first call on a minor secondary violation we handle, we report those to the Southeastern Conference. They look at them. And the commissioner in our conference has the authority to add penalties if he so chooses. Then it goes to the NCAA where they look at it. That's kind of the level 3s, or what we used to call secondary violations. If we've got a major infractions case, then we're going to, first of all, I'm going to notify the Southeastern Conference of what we had. The second phone call, well, that'd probably be the second. The first phone call I would make would be to our outside counsel that helps us with those types of cases. And I learned a long time ago that you cannot do those by yourself. And as we talked earlier, there's not a lot of people in that practice that really do a lot with institutions handling major infractions cases. Once the outside counsel comes in, we talk about what we have. At that point in time, we would decide whether to reach out to the NCAA at that point in time. A lot of times these investigations, the NCAA already knows, and they're the ones that contact you as well. That's the other side of the coin in those situations, where they would contact you and say, we've heard this, we want to look into it. Or in the new enforcement staff, I will say, sometimes they will call you and say, why don't you look into this, and if you think there's anything there, call us, let us know. But if it's not, let us know, and they don't automatically send investigators down to your campus, because once they get on your campus, they don't like to leave.
I've heard.
Oh, it's a nightmare. I've been through 2.
How in the world are they going to be able to, I mean, isn't there like 40 programs that are being announced in this FBI stuff? How can they possibly hire enough people to investigate all of them?
Well, in this issue, they have been told, stand down.
They literally, FBI was investigating for, I think, over a year before they even told the NCAA they were doing that.
Right.
So the NCAA is, I mean, they're certainly thinking about it, but they're not actively involved at this point.
They are not, and they have been told not to. And I have some colleagues at other schools in our league who unfortunately are involved in this saga, and DOJ told them exactly the same thing. You do not do anything until we get there. And they did. They did not. That's kind of been the issue here. The NCAA has been told, and the NCAA was about to hit the ground running too. And they were told right quick to stand down.
Yeah, we've seen the NCAA in other cases kind of piggyback off of other investigations, like the Penn State case. So they came in, Penn State hired an independent investigator. What's his first name? Louis. Yeah. And NCAA basically didn't do their own investigation, they just relied on that investigation and levied the penalties, which were ultimately turned out to be not a great idea because they all got revoked at the end anyway. But that was obviously a unique case, but that could be something that we you see happen here? I don't know. I think we're in uncharted waters at this point with the FBI
Very
stuff.
Well, you have the same thing going on at Michigan State right now, an investigation of Larry Nassar, and all the things, horrible things he did to all the Olympic athletes. To what extent is the university responsible for that, and ongoing litigation about that. I think the big difference to keep in mind between the enforcement staff and the FBI is the FBI has this lovely tool called subpoena power that the enforcement staff doesn't have. And so I think that's the hard and frustrating thing about a lot of these enforcement cases when you read them, when you try to follow them in the media, is the investigators, they're not following what we would think in law school as basic due process. So an investigator will go talk to someone, and they'll say, okay, that's the story, that's it. And if you're at the university, you're thinking, wait a second, I'd like to cross-examine that person. Right? But the way the enforcement process is set up, it's not, and there are a lot of people involved in it that are not lawyers, and certainly the Committee on Infractions system is not set up like a legal proceeding in a way in which you have evidence being excluded if it's hearsay. I mean, the committee's doing the best they can to find out whatever information they can, but a lot of people can just say, hey, I don't want to testify, I've graduated, and so I'm not participating. And so they're trying to cobble this together, whereas with the FBI, I think they're going to get to the bottom of all this, and sort of see what's happened with respect to, to what extent the runners have been a part of this, have been student athletes been getting loans or been getting cash advances of 6 figures. Why don't each of y'all comment to the extent you have thoughts about the current investigation? Where do you see it going? I mean, to what extent is all this stuff that's been happening smoked the last week? The Arizona basketball coach, we had this recording apparently that Mark Schlayback was reporting about last week. He did coach Saturday night. Now he's pushing back, saying he might sue ESPN. He's reinstated as the coach. I mean, to what extent is this smoke, or is there real fire behind all this? And what thoughts do you guys have on this? People follow this?
I am excited as hell for this investigation. Because, and again, everything you said about due process and the NCAA investigative powers is true. I've got a little more pessimistic view of NCAA investigations in that, it's not really in NCAA's best interest to find violations against their blue chip programs. Some would argue, including myself, that the NCAA has really one primary goal or charge: make money. Taking down a Michigan football or a Kansas basketball or whatever is bad for business. So how truly incentivized are they to do an investigation that's going to bring down one of their blue chip programs? Again, I'll just say that some would say that. The FBI has a very different motivation. They don't like going public with an investigation without getting some results. It's embarrassing to them. And, again, they do have the subpoena powers. They do have resources and capabilities that the NCAA probably only dream of. And I think what you're going to see is you're going to see this investigation over a number of years probably kind of go in waves. So you're going to see a bunch of indictments, and then it's going to go quiet for a while. Because what's going to happen is they're going to get all these guys in a room with a big mirror on one wall, or two-sided glass, and they're going to say, okay, well, here's your options. You could spend the rest of your life in Club Fed, or you can tell us everybody you haven't talked to in your life. Prison forever, or I just turned down some guys. Hey, let me give you this big list of names. And these guys are all going to roll. They're not hardened criminals. These are not, mafioso. They're assistant basketball coaches. They probably don't like sleeping in a 2-star hotel, let alone a prison. So they're going to say, yes, I'm going to tell you everybody I've ever talked to, please do not put me in jail. So then you'll see another round of indictments as the FBI investigates those leads. And then the same process is going to happen again. These guys are going to get sucked in. And they're like, oh, prison. Yeah, that would probably not work into my schedule. So I'm going to tell you about everybody I've ever spoken to, and I'm going to turn dime on everybody I can think of. And you're going to kind of see this wave for a while. As people get, threatened with prison, cough up the ghost, and then it'll be quiet, and then it'll happen again and again and again. I think you're going to see it for quite some time, and I think ultimately it's going to lead to a drastic shift in the world of college athletics. Particularly basketball. For reasons that we haven't really touched on yet. But it's going to be. I think it's going to stay really within college basketball because of the shoe and apparel company involvements. For whatever reason, you don't see like that level of control over sport in football by the shoe and apparel companies that you do in basketball.
Because the one player.
Right. It's the Sonny Vaccaro model that he created back with Michael Jordan and whatever. I mean, it's just kind of just grow bigger, and badder, you know, so I think that's what you're gonna see for a number of years, and I think it might be the impetus that changes a lot of the things that we can talk about all day today about the model of amateurism. What does that mean, and, you know, what do conferences do? Do we get the Power 5 association?
I agree with pieces of that, in particular the part that we're just kind of hitting the tip of the iceberg. Even with what's out there right now, I mean, all this information is still sealed, so you know it hasn't been released to the public. The leaks that have been coming out have been the Sean Miller one appears to be kind of false now, although who knows. But there's literally like thousands and thousands of recorded hours of phone calls that are under seal right now in documents and other things. So. I think it has the potential to spread, and then for reasons that Scott stated, that information could lead to more information. The FBI involvement in general is really fascinating. There's the whole angle of whether they even have legal ground to stand on. The arguments are at least somewhat flimsy in that they're really going into uncharted territories as far as charging these wire fraud claims here that's never really been done before. Like we talked about, like just the act of paying a college player is not illegal in itself. So whether or not they can actually make charges stick is a whole different question. And then where all of that leads to changing the NCAA model itself, if they ever let the NCAA get involved with it, is kind of the next question. But I do think this could be like the kick in the butt that college basketball needs. I'm a little bit, I think in this investigation, football's going to get dragged in at some point too. I mean, it's just, I don't think it's any secret that similar things happen. It may not be the same sort of model and setup and players, but at the same time, I think that for one reason or another, whether that's just the changed part on the model, football's going to get dragged into it too, because where there's money, there's so.
I mean, the two precedents that they have the Norby Walters case and the Myers Leahy case, but those were both agents. And so the agents had given the players money and then helped the players send in their statement to the university saying, hey, I'm an amateur. And so the idea is that they're defrauding the universities. The university is the victim in all of this, which is really ironic because the basketball coaches paying the players and then benefit the university. That maybe it's just the other part of campus that's outside the basketball stadium is the victim. I don't know. But it's going to be interesting to see how wide, white-collar crime is notorious for having broad statutes, which, I mean, the joke among U.S. attorneys is, yeah, how can we indict Mother Teresa? We got a whole list here. So the prosecutors have all this power, but a lot of the scope and the application of these statutes is just untested, and so you never know the extent to which courts are going to say, yes, you can interpret fraud in this way and count this as defrauding the university. Adidas and you've given this student athlete all this money, student athletes giving this recruit all this money to come play, is that defrauding the university's amateur status or not? But then I want to get you weighing on this too, because you've got friends who are dealing with this on the front lines.
And we all had to deal with it, whether we realize it or not. One of the things that we were told by the NCAA we had to do was a complete review of our men's basketball program. And that was our office acquiring all the phone records for all our basketball coaches. And not only our coaches, our GA, our video person, our director of basketball operations, which are a lot of times people that you better be watching over as well. We did bring in outside counsel. They interviewed all of our coaching staff, and they interviewed every single player on our team. And that laundry list of names you read in the paper, every one of my players were asked about every one of those people. We had pictures to show them. Have you ever seen this guy? This guy's name is so-and-so. I don't know that guy. So, no, I don't know that guy. Well, it's also the fact that it's a very, very well known at this time. We're not very good at men's basketball. So the type of players, I have one player who would come close to fitting into that recruiting model of that. And he's there because his brother already plays for us. So, but it's kind of unique. You talk to those high-profile players about, you know, this guy, you ask him all the questions, but then you get out and you have to interview the freshman walk-on from Tupelo, whose summer basketball experience was playing with the Northeast Mississippi Stars. Well, what'd you get? Well, we didn't get anything but the jersey. We had to buy our own shoes and everything. So it's kind of a broad spectrum here. We have fought very hard to keep football out of this. But the equivalent of AAU basketball and football is 7-on-7 football. And we have banned those tournaments from our campuses. Our coaches don't recruit in the summer. Our football coaches are not allowed to recruit in the summer when a lot of these things are going on. One of the concepts that our basketball coaches are begging us for is, please take us out of July recruiting. If we leave and there's no college coaches there, the dynamic of that's going to change. And we've got a lot of college basketball coaches really would love to stay on our campus. We have summer access. They can work with our current players in the summer. Let them spend time with the players that are actually going to be on our team. And there's plenty of opportunities to recruit and get us out of that mess that is summer recruiting. We've cut it down a lot, but get us out of it would be something I would really enjoy.
I want to pivot to one more topic, which is, starting, I think, with Johnny Manziel, we've sort of seen him now with the big baller brand, sort of cult of personality. And so one answer to this amateurism problem is to say, look, the real money is in advertising. Let the athletes just go get their endorsements while they're playing. And to me, that was the bigger consequence of the O'Bannon case, was to say, hey, you can't go and get endorsements. Our basketball player can't go be the spokesperson for the local car dealership. You can't do that. And so, you have the Ball family, I think, is pushing the envelope on this and having to essentially send two of their kids overseas. But do you see there being any sort of shift with NCAA and being more open to that kind of world, saying, no, we're not going to give you any of the March Madness revenue, but hey, if you can go advertise for Home Depot, more power to you, because maybe that might even enhance the visibility of a product that's already very visible anyway. So I don't know, you'll have thoughts about that being as a different sort of angle as to dealing with this whole idea of money in college sports.
I think it's probably the most commonly named solution out there is to, schools don't pay them, but if you can go get it on your own, that's great. And it seems good. I agree. I feel like that allows the athlete to capitalize on their likeness. I think that there is the potential for abuse in that scenario as well. The whole booster factor could very easily be abused there. Let's just say a local booster owns a car dealership and they're guaranteeing, of course they want to have all the hotshot athletes in their cars driving around campus, so they're now offering every single recruit a nice car with the dealership's name on the side, and they're advertising for them, but they're really just giving them a car. It's just a workaround, right? Let's think about University of Oregon, which Phil Knight, owner of Nike, is very involved with. Let's say, okay, you guys will all be sponsored by Nike, $500,000 each year to every player. We'll throw you in some commercials, and there we go, because he wants to see his football team do well. So I think that in spirit, I like that approach probably the best out of all of them. But in practice, there would have to, again, it's hard to restrict it, because then you're running into antitrust issues too, but in practice, it has the potential for abuse.
Maybe it's a Phil might tell the football coach, hey, you need to start this quarterback, not that one.
Or it's just like, I'm sure a lot of you follow recruiting, college football recruiting, so let's just say from a baseline, no other deals involved, whatever, you can come to Oregon and get $500,000. That's just like a professional league now. It takes it out of there. So, and I think Phil Knight would do that probably. He's already done so much money into their facilities and their uniforms and really used them as the poster child. Because honestly, it's not just his benefit of having a good team, but it's his benefit of his brand and his image too. And he can almost justify that from a business perspective. But let's go down the road to Oregon State. And do they have a Phil Knight who can do the same thing for their school? No. So if you're a recruit in that area and you're the top guy, which school are you going to pick? It really creates sort of an unfair competition among schools in the recruiting game, but I don't know if there's a way to work around that or not.
Well, I guess I'll start by saying when it comes to Johnny football and LeVar Ball, the first thing I do is look for a mute button. But, you know, what Dan says is exactly right. I mean, you know, nothing sanitizes like sunlight, so I mean, I think there is some value to bringing it out in the open. But, you know, sunlight only works if you actually have the capacity to be embarrassed by disclosure. You know, if you're Phil Knight, I mean, do you really care what people think? I mean, maybe he does, but if I'm Phil Knight, I don't care. You know, if I've got a program, I'm like, hey, here's $500,000 for you, $500,000 for you. Hey, it's a $500,000 party. You're all getting $500,000 checks today. And you're all spokespeople for Nike. I wouldn't care what people thought. Because I know that, you know, as bad as I felt, I would feel a lot better when we were hoisting a national championship trophy. You know, that would fix a lot of my bad feelings. So I don't know how you would address that problem. I mean, I think in a vacuum, yeah, it's great. You know, let the players, you know, monetize their rights to publicity. But, you know, it's not a matter of if it's going to be abused by everybody, it's just a matter of how much and who does it better. And I don't know how you put restrictions and parameters around that to kind of keep things, you know, to a point where your top 10 isn't always the schools that happen to be fortunate enough to have a billionaire apparel company owner as an alumni. And not saying anything about Phil Knight, I don't know the guy, I just know what I would do if I had his money.
You get this panel right now, right?
Absolutely. But you all have free shirts.
We're in Adidas schools, I'm okay. It is a challenge, and I know it's something that has to be addressed, and I don't have a solution. I know how we deal with it right now, because we recently had that type of athlete on our campus in Dak Prescott. So what we did and the approach we took very early is I brought Dak in probably his, right in the middle of what was his redshirt junior year. And we had a lot of notoriety dealing with Dak. We had dealing with legal counsel. We had a lot of T-shirts and things like that you deal with and those kind of things. But we also knew what we had. And we also wanted to help Dak protect his name and his brand. So through the Special Assistance Fund, I hired an attorney out of Jackson who specializes in copyrights, branding. And when we brought him up and sat down with Dak, and we spent a good bit of money in Dak's career helping him protect his brand, copywriting, his name, website, you name it. Anybody that made shirts with his likeness, this attorney went after them legally. And we won every time, obviously. And we did that for Dak. We didn't do it for Mississippi State. We did it for Dak. And when Dak left us, fortunately went to the NFL, all of this went with him, and he had all that. Now, that's probably not unique. Other universities have probably done it, but that's the approach we took, and we would take again if we had that type of athlete on our campus. Because day to day, there's two main reasons I go to work every day. The first reason I go to work is to protect the integrity of Mississippi State University. That's what Mark Keenum tells me to do. The second reason that I go to work every day is to protect our student athletes. And I think that's part of doing that. When you have a high-profile kid, are you helping that kid make his life better down the road? The rules limit what we can do right now. That may change. But for now, we're going to deal with it the best way we can within the rules.
And I think you know, every university should take that approach, and everybody should have the two mandates. You know, protect the integrity of our university and protect our student athletes. But even in an altruistic situation like that, or, you know, just doing the right thing, even that system's got a potential for abuse. You got a rich booster that wants to funnel some money to a kid, to Dak, you know, for example. Hey, I'm gonna go out and print a bunch of T-shirts. Oh no, I got sued. Okay, fine, I'll sell for $250,000. Here you go. You know, it's basically like funneling money to the player through a straw man. You know, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do, trying to protect the kid, and yet somebody's abusing them, protecting him by just manufacturing a way to funnel money to a player. So, I mean, you know, even when you're doing things right, there's potential for abuses. And let's be honest, the crooks are always a couple steps ahead of the honest people. Because as a general rule, you know, you don't even conceptualize like that somebody would kind of be that shady, but it's college athletics. I mean, you know, if you haven't figured it out by now, it's kind of a shady business sometimes, you know, when it comes to boosters and everything else. So that's why it's like, you know, you just get it out in the open and just have it be out there and then figure out what to do with it at that point. Because, you know, I mean, I hate the argument that it's going to happen anyway, but in this case, it's going to happen anyway.
Right, and then the big question is to what extent does the few bad actors and destroy the Camelot that we have, the college athletics that we have. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it half as much as I have. Let's give all our panelists a round of applause. Thank you guys for coming. Enjoy your weekend. I'm sure they'll stick around for a minute if you want to say hello to them. But thank you guys so much.